Welcome to the It Is Written podcast. As doubts about God's will arise, the world resorts to feelings and experts. We go to the law and to the testimony of God's word. In today's episode, we are going to be looking at the second psalm, where the nations decide to rage against God and his king. What lessons are there for us to learn in a world where there is a real temptation to put our trust in the kings and politicians of this land?
I'd like for us to look at Psalm 2. Psalm 2 is a psalm very frequently quoted and referred to in the New Testament. Acts 4 says it was written by David. Acts 13 that it was the second psalm. And it starts with some questions. Would you read verses 1 to 3?
Sure. Why did the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers conspire together against the Lord and his anointed one. Let's tear off their chains and throw the ropes off of us.
So this psalm is 12 verses. It's in groups of 3. This is the first. It starts with the why question, kind of a astonished why, an amazed why. Why are the nations in an uproar and the peoples devising a vain thing? It's so illogical, it's so absurd to think that these nations are rebelling against the Lord Almighty. Creatures up in arms against their God? How can anyone, even the world's most powerful earthly rulers, think that they could break free from the control of God?
Yeah.
So he's asking that question.
And this image in verse 3, let's tear off their chains and throw the ropes off of us. That God is this chain that's weighing us down. It's just an awful picture.
Well, and it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that too.
It's a vain thing. It can't succeed. Everything opposed to God will fail. And really, the whole point of this psalm is that word vain. It will not work. They take their stand, the kings of the earth. They take counsel together. You know, they've decided, they're determined, they're resolute, they're firm about it. They took their stand. You know, it's not going to last. And they cooperate together. It's amazing how the nations of the earth differ on so many things. Their political systems, their economic ideas, their social structures. But there's one thing they agree about. They want to get rid of God. And here that's what they're doing. They assert themselves these kings of the earth, the rulers, all the big shots come together. And here's what they say. They say, let us tear their fetters apart and cast away their cords from us. We get to kind of listen in on their fight for freedom. Their watchword is, we're not going to put up with this. We don't like this cramping, restrictive, binding laws of God. We're going to throw those off. We're going to do what we want to do. And really, that idea of wanting more freedom, wanting to do what we want to do, is a lot of the reason for rebellion against God even today.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And he says, and Satan from the days of the garden has represented God's laws as being hostile restrictions, holding us back from our proper freedom.
Yeah, the example or analogy I heard someone use once, the fish is only free when it's in the water. That fish can fight against it and throw himself up on land. But what's going to happen when he puts himself where he was never supposed to be? He's going to die. And that's what we do when we fight against God. We thrust for freedom and we fight for it, and then we get what we think is real freedom. But what we actually learn is that kind of freedom is slavery to sin.
Yes, it is. It'll never work. It's interesting that the only thing they do is talk. Let us tear their fetters apart. They never actually manage to accomplish any of the things they say.
And isn't that what we do? We just talk. We don't do anything.
They talk big.
Yeah.
It didn't amount to anything. Yeah. God's response, 4-6.
The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord ridicules them. And then he speaks to them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath. I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain.
He who sits in the heavens laugh. One thing we don't see the Lord do in this psalm is get up from his throne.
Yeah.
In contrast with the feverish activity of these world leaders, God is calm and unfazed. He sits on his throne chuckling. It's amusing to him, the feeble efforts of these creatures to rebel against their creator. It certainly is not going to work. It's a ridiculous plan, a race of pygmies trying to confront the giant. The Lord doesn't bother to negotiate with them. He doesn't adjust himself to suit their demands. He simply reaffirms his royal plan,
yes,
speaking in his anger, terrifying them in his fury. And his speech is really the turning point of this psalm. As for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. God says, you pursue your course, I'll pursue mine. I am putting my king on my holy mountain, and he will rule. The answer to this rebellion is for God to enthrone his king to further his purpose. So it's interesting that when it comes to the nations plotting, verse 3 is their words. When it comes to God's response, verse 6 are his words. The nation's words are just their proposed actions. They never accomplish it.
Right.
God's words are accomplished.
Yeah, and I like at least the way my translation says it in verse 6, I have installed.
Yes.
The idea of an installation. It's done. It's put in. I've installed this. And God's installation, it stays there.
The king is ruling, and the nations can't just throw away the ropes of God's rule as easily as they thought they could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent point.
So the response of the king, 7 through 9.
I will declare the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, and the ends of the earth your possession. You will break them with an iron scepter. You will shatter them like pottery.
Here the king relates the words of the decree that made him king. You are my son, today I've begotten you. The idea of the son, 2 Samuel 7, is the idea of being the king. And this is the decree that God put in to overcome the rebellion of these nations. He says, ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance. The very ends of the earth is your possession. Jesus is the one who rules over these nations. They are his. These plots are totally vain. They are totally worthless and empty. He said, you will break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. Clay pots are very fragile. They're very brittle. You take an iron rod and hit it against a clay pot, it'll break it into smithereens. It shows the contrast between the absolute power Jesus has and the total helplessness we have. The fragility of even the most powerful rulers and kingdoms in the world before the reign and control of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent point.
10 through 12, how should we respond?
So now, kings, be wise. Receive instruction, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with reverential awe, and rejoice with trembling. Pay homage to the Son, or he will be angry, and you will perish in your rebellion. For his anger may ignite at any moment. All who take refuge in him are happy.
So there's some points for us to get kind of takeaways from this. Show discernment. Be wise.
Yeah.
Use your head.
Yeah. It's not going to go good if you try to overthrow this.
It's not. It's not going to work. It's going to be a vain thing, and it's going to be terrible for you. Be warned. God's judgments are certain. Worship the Lord with reverence. Rejoice with trembling. We need to serve God. We need to use our mouths for worship, not for vain words of rebellion. Mm-hmm. God expects us to submit to him, and that's the only wise thing we can do.
Yeah, that's the right word there. Submit. Get on board.
Yeah. Kiss the Son, or do homage to the Son. Show your allegiance to Jesus, that he may not become angry and you perish in the way. You don't want his wrath to be soon kindled. Mm-hmm. His anger can be devastating. There is no refuge from God. There's only refuge in God. How blessed are those who take refuge in him. So the only right thing in view of God's kingship and the view of the Messiah's rule is to submit, is to obey what they say. Any idea that we can just tear off God's rules because we don't like them, we don't want to do what God says, that's destined to abject failure.
Mm-hmm. So Gary, something I'm thinking about, just so relevant right now, we're in a political season, the election's coming up. What do you think some of these principles would say to the Christian?
Well, it says to us that God's in charge.
Yeah.
The rulers are all under God. And so we don't have to be overly worried about who wins and who loses. God is in charge.
Yeah. And it should give us the right perspective. While the nations are raging about these things, we should be able to step back and see as Christians, we're in the world, but we're not of the world. We're watching all this going down and understanding our king is already on the throne. We're going to submit to him.
It's kind of amusing seeing how powerful they think they are.
Right. And when we have this perspective, it really, I think, should change the way we see the next time that political ad comes on TV or we watch the news and people are all up in arms. The Christian should be bothered by that.
That's right. God's in control and no force of man will overthrow that.
Thank you for listening to the It Is Written podcast.
If you'd like to leave a review, we would ask that you would do so in your preferred listening platform so that we can use this as an opportunity to reach those who would like to hear God's Word. And if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to send Gary an email at garyfisher1063@gmail.com. We hope you have a blessed day.